Welcome. When looking through the list, the RSVP list earlier today, and seeing the number of families who are coming tonight who are not enrolled yet at this school, it's great to see referral from a friend, St. Thomas Bulletin, St. Mary's in Foxborough, post-Mass conversation, and it is really inspiring because as our board chairman refers to Sparhawk as ultimately an instrument more so than an institution. We are certainly a growing institution, but we are a strengthening instrument for bringing people together who are journeying this mission forward of trying to raise virtuous and cultured and competent men who lead their families with dignity and as we like to say, dignify their work with an entrepreneurial spirit here. And so we have a really special guest here tonight. Brother from one of our brother schools, the Heights schools down in Potomac, Maryland. Michael Moynihan graduated summa cum laude from Notre Dame's honors program in 1992. He went on to earn his master's degree from Catholic University, and he's been at the Heights School since 1995, where he has taught AP chemistry, ethics, math, religion, coast cross country. He founded the Mountaineers Club, a wonderful group that has hiked hundreds of miles, if not maybe close to thousands of miles, all along the East Coast. And he became the head of the upper school in 2002. So when we say that he's seen it all, we mean it. He's also the author of 3 books on fatherhood and parenting, which, given that he and his wife, Angela, have 11 children, we can safely say they are informed by more than just research. Tonight, Michael is here to offer parents something genuinely useful, practical wisdom and real confidence for raising children who know who they are, what they're made for, and how to live it, even when the world around them seems to be doing its level best to convince us otherwise. Please join me in welcoming Michael Moynihan.
Thank you, Mike. It's good to be here in Boston with Sparhawk here. We are all here today because we share specifically the same goal, to raise children who are in tune with God's plan for love and marriage, children who are free to love with generous hearts, hearts that are ready to embrace whatever vocational calling they discern. And this is no small task in today's world. I like the way that Scepter has designed the cover of my book here. He put a bicycle with square wheels. I think it's an apt image for a bit of what we're facing today. And the family is certainly under attack and has been for some time. And it's an attack that's not unrelated to the sexual revolution that we've gone through as a society. Society has changed a lot over the past century. The average person on the street used to view marriage and human love much differently than is common today. To take a striking example, it used to be the case that there was a general societal consensus that contraception is immoral. It is difficult for us to imagine this today because contraception is viewed mostly as a divisive Catholic issue. The possibility of it again being seriously considered in the public square seems remote. There's a striking passage in Leo Tolstoy's novel from 1878, Anna Karenina, that reflects the societal attitude up into the 20th century. Anna explains the possibility of contraception to a shocked Princess Daria. "Impossible," says Dolly, opening her eyes wide. For her, this was one of those discoveries, the consequences and deductions from which are so immense that all one feels for the first instant is that it is impossible to take it all in, and that one will have to reflect a great deal upon it. She simply gazed with wide open eyes of wonder at Anna. This was the very thing she had been dreaming of, but now learning that it was possible, she was horrified. She felt that it was too simple of a solution to a too complicated problem. She then exclaims in French, the language cultured Russians used at the time, that, but it is immoral. Well into the 20th century, contraception was understood by most people to be a wrenching of illicit control over the wellsprings of life, technological control disrupting the relationship at the heart of the family. Change started to come about with the progressive movement of the early 20th century. Out of progressivism came a push for social engineering and a strong eugenics movement on both sides of the Atlantic, not just in Germany. Those involved in the eugenics movement championed more control over human reproduction, advocating contraception and even forced sterilization. This push led, in 1930, to the Lambeth Conference of the Anglican Church, giving limited support to artificial contraception as a form of birth control, the first time in history for a Christian denomination or any mainstream societal institution to give such support. In the aftermath of the Second World War, there was a temporary pause to the sexual revolution, partly because the world saw the horrors of eugenics firsthand in the Nazi death camps. But the pause was short-lived. By the end of the 50s and throughout the 60s, contraception was becoming increasingly accepted, widespread, and legal. There was a period of ambiguity in the Catholic Church when it was suggested by some that the pill was morally acceptable. In this context, St. Paul VI's 1968 encyclical, Humanae Vitae, came as a shock to those who expected a change. The traditional understanding was upheld, and St. Paul VI prophetically noted that if contraception becomes widely accepted, the consequences would be marital infidelity, the lowering of moral standards, widespread abortion, the degradation of women, and the abuse of power. Unfortunately, the teachings of St. Paul VI were not heeded by many, and these consequences have been realized. Abortion followed, as well as rising divorce rates, and in our time, fewer marriages in general. Pornography has taken off on a wide scale, partly because of the medium of the internet, and the current state of the narrative is transgenderism, challenging the very meaning of humans being created male and female. Pornography, including content not explicitly sought after, but rather thrust in front of us as we live in today's world, has made it difficult for young people to love with pure hearts and to enter into a vocational state. Some wonder if this is the final chapter in history playing out. They note that Sister Lucia from Fatima talked about the final battle between the church and Satan being over marriage and the family, and they wonder if we are near the end. Others are not so sure. They note that we have been living in the end times ever since Christ came, and how close we are to the end is unclear. Things have been quite crazy before, such as during the French Revolution when the calendar was changed to disrupt Christianity, and a statue to the goddess Reason was erected in Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. Many people of that time found their way back to sanity, and the same is possible for us today. This background perspective is intended to frame what I really want to talk about, which is how we as parents can do our part, which I believe can be decisive in raising children who will thrive in the midst of the confusion, to thrive in ways that lead to a growing counter-revolution of sanity and sanctity, to raise children with hearts free to love and to generously embrace their vocations. At times, I will be speaking directly about my experience as a father, but I think that mothers will be able to apply much of what I say to their own experience, especially with their daughters. I have 6 primary points. First, it is impossible to effectively shelter our children. The world that our children will need to navigate is such that it is no longer possible to shelter them from negative influences. They will have to come to grips with a society where not only sexual license, but also transgenderism and whatever else is on the horizon is being normalized. Our assumption as fathers and mothers has to be that our sons and daughters will encounter pornography and that they will encounter persons who are profoundly confused about the meaning of their being created male or female. Explicit sexual material is prevalent not only on the internet, a mere click or pop-up away, but also in the public spaces where we live, A walk down a city street or through a checkout line is not what it used to be. It is not that we as parents should entirely give up on the project of protecting our children from harmful content. It is a good thing to have limits on computer use, to recognize that it is not fair to give a teenager unfettered access to the internet on a handheld phone, really a computer, so that he can access such content in apparent anonymity. Computers in public places and VidAngel filters for watching movies are helpful. But the best these technical aids can do is help an honest child to stay honest, to limit the assaults that he will need to fend away. The great news is that we parents have much more powerful weapons in this fight for the sanity and sanctity of our children than filters. Our weapons are our relationships with our spouse and with our children, and the education and the mentoring we provide. Which brings me to the second point. Relationships and mentoring are key. The more confusing these times are for children, the more they not only need parental guidance, but the more they want that guidance. We fathers don't have to make ourselves relevant anymore. We just have to be physically and emotionally present when it matters. The family naturally provides a wonderful education. The love of husbands and wives and the home they establish forms children naturally. A normal family, where husband and wife are committed to each other and their children, provides much of what a child needs. The child is secure in knowing that mom and dad love each other and understands his or her place in the world through his or her experience as a loved member of this family. Even today, the experience of growing up in a loving family can provide most of what a child needs to navigate his or her way through the challenges of our time. It is even possible that growing up in such a family could be sufficient. Some children will judge the impure filth in the world and come out on the right side just because of their experience of being loved in a normal family. Practically, this means that for us fathers, one of the best things we can do is invest ourselves, our time, our prayer, our effort in our family relationships. First, we need to continually strive to love our wives better and also to make time for being with our children. There is much that can be said on this topic. The right next step is not the same for each man. If any of you are having trouble figuring out what you can do better, it might make sense to ask your wife. She might have an idea or two. Spiritual direction can also be helpful for a hardworking professional man to know how to balance work, family life, and spiritual life. In a loving family, the father is well positioned to mentor his children, and in the area of God's plan for human love, he is the one best suited to do this in a very particular way for his sons. Mom, of course, has her complementary role to play and will take the lead with her daughters on some things. I remember back to my childhood when sex was not commonly discussed. Among Catholics, this was perhaps because of Humanae Vitae. In the wake of the polarization around Humanae Vitae, many well-intentioned priests and laymen avoided talking about things having to do with marital love. The result that there was little to no catechesis, and it continued to be uncommon for parents to talk to their children. Children growing up were left to figure these things out without guidance or mentoring. The crazy world of today at least has the positive benefit of eliciting a loving mentoring response by many parents toward their children, even if out of necessity. When my oldest son, Michael, was in 5th grade, he is now 28, married, and with 2 children, our first grandchildren. I was a young father receiving lots of great advice and encouragement from older fathers. I realized that I should have my first talk with Michael, that he was likely to start hearing things from other sources, and, as with sound corporate communication strategies, it would be helpful if I got the right message out first. I told Michael I'd like to take him out to talk about things over the weekend sometime. Sure, Dad. What do you want to talk about? Michael, you are getting older, and there are some things that fathers and sons should discuss about growing up. You're not in trouble, just a friendly conversation. Okay. The time arrived for us to go, and I was very nervous, thinking to myself that I hope I don't mess this up. I stalled by stopping at a grocery store to get a treat. Then the time arrived. We made it to a local park with wooded trails and started to walk. Michael, I want to talk to you a bit about God's wonderful plan for the love between a man and a woman. This is a beautiful plan, but it is also under attack today. I went on to talk about how I met my wife, Angela, and about our history, some of which was familiar to Michael already. I made sure to tell him that I knew his mom would be a wonderful wife and mother, and that I am very happy to be married to her and trying to live according to God's plan. I mentioned that when a couple is married, they come together in the marital embrace, and that God can bless this union with children. The marital embrace is a holy thing and should only take place within the context of marriage. I talked a bit about how there is much confusion about these things in today's world, that some people describe this confusion by saying that marriage and the family are under attack. And Satan does seem to be using this strategy to try to attack the great good of God's plan for human families. I explained that we need to be strong in supporting what is right, what is in accord with God's plan. That as Christian gentlemen, we should not tolerate anyone talking in a bad way about women or anything having to do with human love. The advice I received ahead of time was that I don't need to get into too many details on this first talk, that the purpose is to start a conversation and open the communications pathways, but that it is good to answer whatever questions arise and to provide whatever detail is necessary to do so. Michael did have a few questions, including one about homosexual marriage, which I think I did a decent job of answering for him. In the end, I was very happy to have done this. I felt like I had given my son a great gift, that I had spread a loving force field of protection over him. One thing I told Michael is that these matters are meant to be discussed between fathers and sons, and that he should not be talking about them with his peers or younger siblings. He understood this right away. However, when we arrived home, Michael's younger brother, Thomas, 16 months his junior, was very curious. Thomas knew that we were going out to discuss something, and he naturally wondered what it was all about. Michael unhelpfully said, "Thomas, I'm not going to tell you what Dad and I talked about. When you are old enough, Dad will tell you." Thomas then started to pester me to tell him, and the short of it is that Thomas and I had a similar talk the next weekend. I felt like I was gaining lots of experience in this quite quickly. 3 small points on this first talk. First, it's best not to lead with the mechanics. It's better to talk in general terms, starting with something like, God has a plan for the love between a man and a woman, and using a phrase such as the marital embrace. General terms are more in line with the complete meaning of the marital act, which, in the context of the love between a husband and a wife, a love blessed by God. Reductionism, focusing on only one limited aspect, is a problem for our times. St. John Paul II was once asked, challenged really, why the church is so hypocritical in talking about chastity but yet displays naked pictures in the Vatican. Holy Father, why is there pornography in the Vatican? St. John Paul II wisely replied, no, you are mistaken. Pornography is not pornography because it shows too much, but rather because it shows too little. The art in the Sistine Chapel may show skin, but it is not pornography precisely because it is trying to show persons as persons rather than as objects in a limited sexual way. In actuality, the relationship between a father and a son is so conducive to fathers mentoring their sons on the topic of human love that it would be difficult for us fathers to mess this up. Even if we use less than ideal language, overdoing the mechanics instead of referring to the complete meaning of marital love, our sons are still likely to pick up the right overall message because they know that dad loves mom in accord with God's plan. The only way we can really mess this up is by not talking to our sons, not mentoring them at all. Second, even though a more general approach is the best way to proceed with delicacy, respecting our son's innocence, it is not a problem at all to answer whatever questions your son has. Answer them simply and accurately, providing whatever information he seems to want, and not necessarily too much more. If he asks about mechanics, it is not a problem to answer him. You will already have established a context that is open to the full meaning of marriage and family. Any particular details you provide in answer to his questions will be seen in this context. Also, in later intentional talks, which should happen every so often, perhaps every year or so, there can come a point where you rightly perceive the need to go into more detail given the age of your son. Third, refer back to the story of your family. Tell about how you met and fell in love with the woman who became your wife, your son's mother. It is good for you to talk about your own wholesome experience. Some fathers feel that because of mistakes they have made in the past, mistakes that God has forgiven in confession, they are not qualified to talk about these things with their sons. This is not at all true. God has forgiven us, and the natural and supernatural good of a family where parents welcome God, the good of such a family in God's plan is so great that your son is being rightly formed by your love for your wife and children, by your efforts to try to love them better, not by a past that no longer exists. In response to a particular question, you could mention that you have not always lived perfectly according to God's plan, but that the details are not important. I know God has forgiven me for my shortcomings and has given me such a wonderful family. I'm very happy to be trying to live according to his plan. And this brings me to my third overall point, which I call safety is not the goal. Imagine two pilots taking off from a runway facing a formidable tree line. One pilot intends to gain enough elevation to soar into the sky. The tree line is not his concern. Another intends to gain just enough elevation to miss the tree line. If the former falls short of his goal, the consequences are not nearly as dire as for the latter. Similarly, it makes sense for us to set the bar very high in mentoring our children. We shouldn't merely try to keep our children safe. We need to empower our sons and daughters to be warriors, waging a crusade to wipe out the filthy slime sown by the impure sowers of hatred. With 7 sons and 4 daughters, I've had a fair amount of experience mentoring them over the years, and my perspective has deepened. In particular, I've thought lots about what a boy needs to be empowered to wage this apostolic battle. Even in the first conversation, as I mentioned, I note that God's wonderful plan for human love is under attack today, and that we all need to be strong in defending what is right. I unpack this basic principle much more as my sons get older. I explain that if we are present when someone is saying something against God's plan, we have an obligation to take action. To listen passively, for example, as a boy says bad things in front of a group of peers, gives the impression, son, that you are okay with this boy saying these things. You end up communicating to others that the truth in this matter is not that big of a deal, that it is not that important. You could end up harming another by enabling him to think that if you are basically okay with this stuff being said, then it must not be that important. You are contributing to the weakening of this person's conscience, and this is wrong. This is what has traditionally been called causing scandal. Instead of doing nothing, you have some options. The virtue of prudence is needed to decide which option is best. You could walk away, showing by your leaving that you are not okay with what was said. You could also confront the speaker, which might be the best thing to do in the situation. It depends. My sons have all understood this point. We have talked about how it is not always easy to do what is right, and sometimes doing the right thing requires heroic virtue. They get this. But the impure sowers of hatred have unfortunately also made it extremely likely, nearly certain, that someone growing up today will encounter not just crude language, but actual pornographic content. I've thought a lot about the challenge that a young person faces when he reaches this moment of exposure. An episode of the television show The Simpsons captures the problem well. Bart Simpson, a cartoon character, and other neighborhood children see what the viewer knows to be pornography. They are staring, somewhat paralyzed. One reacts, "Ugh, this is disgusting and repulsive, yet strangely compelling and attractive." This is what is likely to happen in many cases when a boy faces exposure to pornography. He will be paralyzed in the face of what he sees, not knowing what to do, repulsed, and yet feeling strangely compromised, and, lacking any perspective, continue to take in the image for a time, caught like a deer in the headlights. This is the normal situation of a good child who does not know any better. We as parents know that the right thing to do when faced with pornographic content is to flee, to definitively turn away and not engage with it in any way. I want my sons to have the freedom to reject such content from the first, to definitively make an act of the will in direct opposition to any compromising engagement. And so, when in later conversations, the topic of pornography is addressed, I try to provide the best guidance I can. Son, if you are with a group of your peers and someone takes out a pornographic image to show, you are obliged, at the very least, to leave fast. But it actually could be better if you reach out and grab the paper or whatever and destroy it. Turn to the person who had it and tell him, "If you have a problem with this, tell your dad to call my dad," and then walk away. I distinctly remember a conversation I had with my son, Stephen, where the possibility of grabbing someone's cell phone and throwing it down on the ground and stomping on it was discussed. He got a dangerous smile on his face. I could tell he was thinking that Dad is giving him permission to smash someone's phone, and it would be really cool to do so. The thought of what I'm getting myself into did cross my mind. But in all seriousness, even if I do have to deal with destroyed property, which I haven't yet, it is worth it to me knowing that each of my sons knows that I have his back on this one. He has my permission, indeed encouragement, to act decisively to reject the great evil of pornography from the first instant. Knowing that I have his back makes him less likely to stand paralyzed before compromising content. There is so much more that can be said here, mentoring our sons to guard their eyes and guard their hearts, to turn to Our Lady, to take care of their mothers and their sisters. Fourth point, education is essential. I mentioned earlier that the cultural moment we are living through has an interesting history. To really understand what is going on, we need to go back quite a ways. The problems we face are related to patterns of thought going back centuries, but really coming to the fore in recent times as a driving force for cultural change. If we as fathers love our wives and children, establish families in accord with the truth of God's designs, and warmly and patiently mentor our sons, if we do all this, we are doing great good. But our children are growing up in a time when the contemporary mindset is in opposition to those who, as my older children say, are based. This term, based, is a new term that, as far as I can tell, means for this generation of counter-revolutionaries the opposite of woke. I think it comes from based in reality or something like that, as opposed to defining reality according to my inner core of intuitions via expressive individualism. In any case, as our children get older, they need an education that will help them understand and fall in love with the truth, but also be aware of what is driving culture today. They will need this to be able to effectively engage people today and to stay based themselves. They very much need a school like Sparhawk. Parents can do lots to promote this type of education at home, especially by guiding media consumption and by encouraging good reading habits. There's a chapter in my book on how literature can help with this, including guidance in selecting such literature. In addition to literature, our children need to learn sound philosophy and theology. Most parents will not be able to provide a complete education, but it is possible to partner with mission-aligned schools and even to join together to find a way for the right supplemental education classes to take place. For broader perspective, I would like to recommend a book. It's called Strange New World by Carl Trueman, which seniors at the Heights read as part of their History of Western Thought class. This is actually a shorter version of a longer, more scholarly book, The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self. Ryan Anderson reached out to Trueman and encouraged him to write a shorter book that highlights the key content for the layman. Everyone needs to read your book, Carl, but no one is going to read it. Trueman explores in his shorter book, and as well as his longer one, the cultural and intellectual trends that have made the sexual revolution all the way up to transgenderism possible. He helps explain our current cultural moment with reference to the changing thought patterns that have led us to this point. He traces an arc of intellectual history through figures such as Descartes, Rousseau, Hegel, Marx, Nietzsche, and Freud, and how their thinking is behind the so-called sexual revolution. Expressive individualism, being authentic by acting out of one's inner core of feeling and intuition, has become the dominant ideology of our time. To be an authentic person now means acting outwardly, performing really, according to one's unique inner intuitions and feelings. This means that to not affirm someone's personal lifestyle choice is in some way an assault on the person's dignity. In contrast, at the root of Western civilization is the conviction that knowing truth is liberating. The ancient Greeks saw contemplating the way the world is, contemplating reality, as fulfilling a desire for transcendence written into the human heart. Life may seem monotonous, a never-ending cycle of birth, hardships, and death, but the human mind can grasp unchanging truth, and this knowing was seen as presenting the possibility of transcendent meaning, as leading to human fulfillment and freedom. This paradigm, where man stands before the world in awe, with his gaze primarily directed outward, toward knowing the world and the self as a part of the world, endured for thousands of years. René Descartes, 1596 to 1650, ushered in a new approach by shifting the focus inward to the human person as a thinking subject. His famous "I think, therefore I am" presented the self as a new starting point for knowledge. The inner self started to emerge as a new point of departure. This inner self was idealized by Rousseau and the Romantic movement in the early 19th century. Indeed, Rousseau posited that the inner world, what we can call one's subjectivity, is what is authentic about a person and what is threatened by society. Rousseau rejects the notion that man is marred by original sin, that he needs a redeemer to become truly himself. Instead, man longs for the freedom to realize himself according to his inner natural intuitions, which are pure, noble, and good. The Romantic movement that followed seems, on the surface, to be a renewed appreciation of nature, which to some extent it is, although it is better understood as seeing meaning in nature according to this newly discovered inner subjectivity. Though the intellectual elites up through the Romantic period had departed from the Greek notion that human meaning is to be found in knowing objective reality, in knowing truth, the notion of nature had not yet been abandoned. We had not yet reached modern expressive individualism. For Rousseau and the Romantics, it was still possible to talk about human flourishing according to what it means to be human. With Marx, Nietzsche, and others, a further shift occurs. For Marx, there is no such thing as a stable human nature. Instead, all human values, culture, art, the way we understand reality, and every way we associate with others, are political superstructures built upon the underlying substructure of economics. Liberation is to be found in the advance of history to the point where economic substructures no longer lead to oppression and alienation. Nietzsche goes further still by positing that human fulfillment can only be found by the artist who creates his own meaning, who creates himself. In our current cultural moment, the expressive individualism Truman describes, knowing truth in the classical sense is of limited importance. Even if it is possible to know objective reality, it is questionable why someone would want to do so. If authentic meaning comes from within, then the possibility of objective knowledge of an external reality becomes potentially limiting to one's freedom to determine oneself, to perform according to one's unique inner subjectivity. We are living through an eclipse of truth in favor of power, specifically power to perform our own versions of reality in ways informed by the sexual revolution. Destructive cultural forces have been present, growing according to their own principles for centuries. St. Paul VI knew about these forces when he issued his prophetic warnings in Humanae Vitae. These forces never had to become ascendant to this extent, and it is possible for the damage to be reversed. Truman's book is very interesting and accessible. Understanding the mindset behind the sexual revolution can help us gain perspective, and for our older children, help them be prepared to engage with the times in which we live. Also, just as a side note, the topic we are considering tonight lends itself to focusing on the problematic side of modern and postmodern thought. This is not the complete story. It's not all bad, but how a complete education should help students to discover how modern thought, despite all its faults, does correct some errors in the classical tradition is beyond the scope of what we can cover in this already long talk. My fifth point has to do with fathers and daughters. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention something about fathers and daughters. In our family, I took the lead in mentoring my sons, and my wife took the lead in mentoring our daughters. This worked well for us. But it is not that a father does not have anything meaningful to say to his daughters, nor a mother to her sons. Things come up naturally, and mentoring takes place all the time. But fathers can intentionally do one easy thing that can be impactful for each of his daughters. Take her out for a treat once in a while and treat her like a princess. Take on a slight gentlemanly air. Open doors for her. Be attentive to her by asking her such things as if she would prefer to have the windows open or the AC on. Stop by the coffee shop or wherever and buy her a treat. Sit down to make small talk with her as she eats. Take interest in what she is saying. All of this is helping to form an image in her mind of how a man should behave toward her. If she is treated in this way by you, she will naturally judge any young man who aspires to date her by the standard you have set. You will be establishing a protective force field around her so that a young man who does not behave in a gentlemanly manner will have little chance with her. And it is so easy to do and very enjoyable. My sixth and final point is on prayer. I've argued that in our common goal of raising children in tune with God's plan for human love, marriage, and the family, our most powerful weapons are not technical tools like internet filters, although they have a place, nor even providing the right information to our children, something that someone else or a book could do, but rather the education and mentoring that can take place in the context of our family, which is a God-designed powerhouse of transformative good. But our effectiveness is also dependent on prayer and greatly aided by prayer. I think our Lord had in mind, among other things, the sexual revolution of our times when he spoke the strong words that it would be better for someone to have a millstone fastened around his neck and be thrown into the sea than to lead astray one of these little ones. The impure sowers of hatred will receive what is coming to them. Our Lord knows about the harmful filth being spread, and though he has great patience with the evil caused by the abuse of human and angelic freedom, partly, I think, because his merciful love and forgiveness is so strong and transformative, he also will not hesitate to act to protect his little ones. Imagine how much the heart of Christ wants his children, made in his image and sharing in his very nature through the sacraments, to become strong men and women with hearts capable of great love. He will not fail to answer the prayers of parents and others who call out to him. He will not fail to provide his grace to us and our children. He will not fail to help us see what practical steps we should take to participate with him in raising our children according to his plan. Some years ago, our entire family, all 11 children, were returning from a family trip. Just as I was getting ready to bark out orders as to how our van should be unloaded, stations for particular children to man, to make the unpacking and transition to the house go smoothly, one of my teenage sons turned to me. "Dad, I need to talk to you." My first thought was, not now. I need to help my wife manage the unloading and putting away, or our family will be like a wave of messy chaos invading our home. But I saw a look in my son's eye that gave me pause. My wife saw it too, and took over the unpacking. My son and I went a little way off by ourselves, and he told me what was on his mind, what he was worrying about. It was not that big of a deal. Something pertaining to God's plan for human love that a few fatherly words of perspective were easily able to clear up. My son was happy after my assurance, and without being interiorly complicated, was able to go on his way. Then it struck me how thankful I should be that he trusted me enough to ask about this matter instead of turning to Google or some other source. And I thought back to the first encouragement I received from older fathers to begin to reach out to my sons when they were just boys. I was overwhelmed by thankfulness and relief, knowing that all the efforts were worth it. We can raise children who are savvy, who are completely aware of what is going on around them, that know the game the impure sowers of hatred are trying to play with them and their peers, that know how to turn away from impurity, to flee from it, to immediately entrust themselves to Our Lady and turn the occasion into a prayer. And we can raise children who are there for their friends, who can help rally an army of friends who will witness to the dignity of the human person and to the fair love that our hearts are made for. Thank you. And I will gladly take any questions that people have. Yes.
I'll get you started. Thank you for the talk.
Sure.
So you have 11 children, 7 boys, and you took the lead in the conversation with the 7 boys.
Yes.
I'm wondering, how did it change from the first and second to the 6th and 7th? And I asked as a father of 5 boys, and I've only started to talk with the first 2. But I just get worried and get to sound like a terrible parent. But like your first kids, you do everything. Like kind of we joke that we don't even like teach our 4th and 5th how to count.
Yeah.
So I get worried by the 4th and 5th. Am I going to remember it? Did I have this conversation with that one or that one? How did you handle it?
Well, with 7 children, I mean, it was not a problem at all. Only joking. So I definitely recognize that tendency too. with the older ones, you're kind of on top of everything, and then as you get down the line, you're not quite as on top of everything. But actually with this, it's more opening up a pathway of communication. So it's that time when, your son is in 3rd or 4th grade, and you go and you just take him off on a walk or something and let him know that God has this wonderful plan, and this is under attack today. And I love your mom. I'm happy I married your mom. And do you have any questions for me? And the question that comes back could be, yeah, are we going to that baseball game? And that's great. That's fine. But what you've done is you've established yourself as the person that they can come to when they have questions. And then I do think it's important to check in every so often, maybe every year or so. And just, especially as they get older, then maybe bring up some more things more intentionally. But most of it is going to be establishing something like with my children, they know. They're like, yeah, Dad, I know what you want to talk about, and I will come to you if I have any questions, anything like that, and that's fine. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
Is there anything now, looking back, you wish you had done differently, or you've learned or gotten feedback from your kids, like, oh gosh, if I could hit the undo button and done that differently, I would.
Yeah. So the one thing I will say is that, as I mentioned a little bit in the talk, I really have grappled a lot with the reality that these young children of mine are going to be exposed to pornography. And what does that look like? What does that look like for a kid, a good kid who sees it and then is kind of like just caught and takes it in? So, some people think I'm crazy for telling my kids that they can grab somebody's cell phone and smash it. But I don't know. I even wish that I had done that with my older ones. I didn't realize that was kind of one of the ways to really help them, to let them know that kind of like I'm there behind them. I have their back. I am supporting them 100%. And if anything comes up, they can react decisively, and they know that they have my support. And I didn't do as good a job with that with the older ones. Yeah. Yes.
So, in your role as an educator, I'm curious, because the Heights is, correct me if I'm wrong, it's an all-boys school?
Yes.
And it is, 3 through 12?
Correct.
So, and we're just at that, embarking at that journey where we have 9th grade, then we're kind of getting up to there. How do you manage the influence at the school, especially when you have boys in the kind of the 15 to 17 age range, and how do things kind of find their equilibrium and norm at what grade level?
Yeah, well, at the Heights, they're all perfect. They never, So, yeah, you do have to deal with the situations that come up at the school. Sometimes people will use inappropriate language. They'll refer to things that they shouldn't refer to. And that's a time for really stern correction for a young man, pulling him aside. You really are out of line in saying that and, laying into him and letting him know that. The overall tone of the school, I think, has a lot to do with the education that's being provided. And I think that there really is a tendency, like if you just go along with the culture, the flow of the culture, the expressive individualism I was talking about is more or less the mindset that people tend to adopt. They tend to assume that we're meant to act out whatever version of our feelings that we come up with. And really, that's not what's going to make somebody happy. That's not what's going to make somebody free, but rather the truth will make them free. So there does need to be a grounding in classes like philosophy and theology, and also a whole approach to the curriculum so that all of the humanities and even the sciences are taught in a way where they're integrated into a complete vision of reality. And, we strive to do that at the Heights. So a lot of the boys end up being based because of it. So, yeah. Yes.
in my opinion, I think that the most important part is not like the big talk, but how do you build this talk like in the everyday life, and how you create opportunities to these topics to come up, even if they are not asking, because they're not going to ask. So how these two things can.
I completely agree. And I think the key point here is that, the reason I titled my book The Talk and Beyond is because it's not just the talk. The talk is a misnomer, where you can try to convey just by having a talk with. The most important thing about having that type of talk with your son, if you're a father, is that you establish yourself as someone that he can go to if he has questions. I'm convinced of that. But a lot of it is establishing a family culture. A lot of it is taking advantage of different things that come up naturally in the home to use as teaching moments. For example, if you're watching a football game and commercials come on and you flip the commercial off, you're like, that was out of line, And that creates kind of like that's really important. Why do mom and dad do that? Well, it's really important because we don't want to be taking in that stuff. So I completely agree that a lot of it has to do just with the overall running of the family, the creating of a family culture. Yeah. Yes.
We're really going against the grain.
Sure.
As we're the counterculture of our own family, not just the culture. So when we have these conversations with our kids, it's been one thing for me to kind of naturally say, like, we're following God's plan. But then when they're starting to put the dots together, that people that they love are not following God's plan, how would you navigate?
You're speaking to this in a very eloquent way, and you're mentioning a challenge that I actually have a chapter in my book where I kind of talk about this a little bit and try to go around the issue. But in short, one thing I think, and this is not an adequate answer to your question, but one thing that I think is important is that we raise our children to have a heart that is open to loving and praying for others, trying to help them to reach the truth in an authentic way. And yes, following God's plan on these things is the path to happiness, but there are a lot of people that are confused. And they might be confused, even in some cases, without any fault of their own. It could be for many different reasons. And so we have to try to have an understanding, and we need to pray for those people a lot. Yeah. Yes.
So I can attest that you have wonderful children. I went to University of Dallas with two of them. They're all really wonderful.
Oh, okay.
And I took a marriage class with one of your sellers, actually. We were in a team thing. My question is, have you ever, or do you have a child whose temperament kind of conflicts with yours to such a point where that communication, there's kind of a barrier in communication, or maybe went through a phase of teenage angst, and how do you do that?
Sure. So I definitely have clashed with different ones of my children more than others over the years. So that's definitely true. And in some cases, I might even have fallen into the point where the overall relationship between myself and that youngster was one that would easily lead to kind of more criticism and more of a critical spirit than is best, than is optimal. I'm not perfect, and our family's not perfect, and that's the way it is. But in those types of cases, what I've always tried to do when I take the time to actually mentor one of my sons, and I know that our relationship is a little bit strained, maybe in some ways, is I set up this time where I really want to talk to him about something important, to be something that is encouraging and fatherly and loving. And hopefully I'm able to convey that and pull that off to the extent that I can. There was one of my sons who he was incredibly laconic. He would talk in one-word answers to any question you asked, and he would not open up about anything. And the only thing I found that worked in getting him to talk was to throw a baseball with him. If I threw a baseball with him back and forth, he would just start talking. And then I could listen to him. And that was like the only way. Like seriously, I was like, this is amazing. Lord, you've shown me a way that I can actually talk to my son, John Paul. And he's a wonderful young man now. But yeah, I mean, these things are going to be part of the family and part of the imperfections of the family. But we deal with it and try to do the best we can given what we have. So I'm glad you know Joseph and Teresa. Yes.
Arguably, I'm sure these conversations have changed. Your oldest is 28 and on down. I'm sure the number one kind of impact has been on this talk generally is phones. And can you talk about how that has changed, from however many years ago you started having to today? And related to that, what recommendations do you have? What are your policies in your family on phones?
On phones, yeah.
And, to the point of being countercultural, that seems like that's the number one way to stay off this.
So we're a bit countercultural. We have a family phone, which is a pinwheel phone that if one of our children are going to be going out and they need a phone, we want them to have a phone to be able to contact us. We'll let them take the family pinwheel phone, right? We've always said that no one will have their own individual cell phone until they are at least a senior in high school, and only then if they are ready for it. So that's been our family policy. And with most of our children, around the time they reach sophomore or junior year in high school, they get pretty cranky. And like we have my daughter right now who's a junior. The most recent conversation with her was, Lucy, I agree that right now as a junior in high school, you are mature enough and responsible enough to have a cell phone, but I am not going to change the family policy for you. You're going to be waiting until your senior year to get your own personal cell phone. So that's kind of what we've done. But
I wonder if you can address both within your family culture and at the Heights, any particular movies or stories that have resonated to build up that character of a man's understanding of vocational life. My daughter, fourth of five, is a avid Jane Austen.
I was just going to say.
Reader and lover. And I see the Heights has many texts of Austen on recommended lists.
We even have a literature class for juniors and seniors that was based around Jane Austen that has been offered a couple times for like a semester every other year. And yeah, Jane Austen, the long BBC version of Pride and Prejudice, that's been watched so many times in our family. It's funny, my daughters, they've got to pull it out like maybe every 4 to 6 months and watch it again. And then my son John Paul goes, Dad, what are you doing? You can't let them watch it again. It's too much. It's too much. No, but I think Jane Austen is wonderful in her playful way of talking about human relationships and things like that. There's so many works from the tradition that are just great in this area. I think David Copperfield by Charles Dickens is a wonderful work of literature. The Betrothed is a wonderful work of literature. Shakespeare has so much rich stuff in there. Sir Gawain and the Green Knight is very interesting in some ways. But there's a great opportunity through literature to actually reach the moral imagination and to help to form people in this way. And we fortunately have a lot of really great stuff. And I have a chapter in my book on that too. So, yes?
I don't know, I arrived a little late, so I don't know if you addressed this already, but what about have you had to deal with or know of people or helped others or just have an opinion about healing a situation where someone may have been exposed and doesn't say anything for a little while, or just like healing after something?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, the key thing is just how incredibly merciful God the Father is. The parable of the prodigal son. And that we have a father here who has this big heart, who is reaching out to try to offer his love, forgiveness, and healing to anyone. And that in the sacrament of confession, there is forgiveness and healing and mercy. And I think that as a father, I mean, I try to tell that. And a lot of times one of the ways to say it is, look, we live in a very difficult culture. There are a lot of people who've been deeply hurt by a lot of these things. And you might even ask yourself the question, why does God allow all this to continue to happen? He loves these little children. Why does he allow this to happen? Why does he allow these things to be the way they are? And the answer is that he has an answer for it. His merciful love is so great, and his healing through the sacraments is so incredibly transformative that he can restore innocence in a radical way that is beyond anything we can imagine. And so I think, making sure that we lead in a sense. I mean, I think the church is even being called today to lean on the mercy of God in a way that is incredibly unique. I mean, it's not an accident that St. Faustina and Divine Mercy Sunday have come to be such prominence today. So, yes.
I don't know, with the talk, kind of what goes hand in hand oftentimes is maybe dating. And as a counterculturalist, I'm assuming that ideally you know dating until college sort of thing. But just that approach, I don't know, it's always something that I've thought of.
Yeah. That's a tricky one. And part of it is there's definitely a lot of conversation in our family about what the purpose of dating is. And the purpose of dating is to discern possible vocation to marriage. And we'll talk about how if people start dating when they're in high school, that's very, very difficult because you're in a relationship which is oriented towards the possibility of marriage, but that is something that's way far down in the future. So it's not absolutely impossible. In fact, at the Heights, we have a couple faculty members at the Heights, colleagues of mine, who ended up marrying their high school sweethearts. And they kept up that relationship through all those years, and then it led to marriage. But it is incredibly difficult. So what I've done with my children is, rather than come out and just say there's an absolute rule you are forbidden from dating, I have taken the approach that this is why dating is so difficult. This is because the way the human heart is, it's an incredibly difficult thing for high school students to be dating and to talk about that, but to not say that it's impossible. And then encourage them to talk to us about any type of situation that comes up. And so we've actually, in taking that approach and in not forbidding dating, we've never really had a high school, one of our children in high school who have been in a serious relationship. So it's worked, I guess, in that sense. Yes?
What advice do you have for families who don't have geographical or financial access to schools like Starhawk or the Heights or St. Benedict's?
Sure. Homeschooling might be an option, but in some cases it's not. And if it's not, all I can say is that the family where a mother and a father love each other and are trying to provide the type of mentoring and formation to their children, this is a God-designed way for goodness to happen. So I would not discount how transformative a family can be, even in the most difficult situations, if they lean on our Lord a lot and pray a lot and try to provide that type of mentoring and that support. And don't just raise your children to be safe, just having that plane barely miss the tree line, but raise them to be apostles. Raise them to go out and transform the culture wherever they are. So it's not easy. Yeah. Thank you. It's been a pleasure to be here. So.